The last year has been irrevocably changed by the world. Globally, nearly 3 million people have succumbed to the coronavirus. More than 560,000 of those were Americans. And on top of that loss, we are also collectively experiencing the trauma of violent images like the death of George Floyd and others, political discord, economic distress, and so much more. Joining me now is Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis, Senior Minister at the Middle Collegiate Church and author of Fierce Love, A Bold Path to a Better Life and a Better World. Also, Dr. Callie Cyrus, a psychiatrist and board member of the Committee to Protect Medicare. Thanks so much for joining me. Dr. Lewis, I want to start with you because, you know, we're experiencing massive loss, but there's also just the day-to-day of managing life. You know, whether work is driving you crazy, or you're going through a divorce, your marriage didn't survive COVID, or that man or that woman ghosted you, or, you know, you're arguing with your friends, family drama, whatever it may be. Just from your perspective, what's a general piece of advice for folks who just have a hard time getting out of bed in the morning?
Well, thank you, Tiffany. It's so good to be with you. And by the way, love your show. Just doing a great job.
Thank you.
You know, absolutely. It's like being in a pressure cooker, isn't it? Our normal everyday life, exacerbated by COVID. Think about the moms and dads tripping over toys in their house. I live in Manhattan, the small apartments, no space, raising your children at home, you know, they're in front of screens. Plus, who can unsee Chauvin's knee on Mr. Floyd's neck? Who can unsee Ahmaud Arbery being hunted by those trucks? So I think what I want to say is kind of blessed are they that mourn, for they will be comforted. That's a spiritual piece of wisdom from our Hebrew scriptures, but also a human piece of wisdom from psychology. Tiffany, if we let ourselves fully feel the pain, the heartache, the disappointment, the sorrow with a friend in our spiritual community on the yoga mat, what makes us resilient and gives us the chance to recover is to honestly face the grief and the pain. That's why we have memorials. That's why we sit Shiva. That's why we have wakes. That's why we do protests, to extrovert the inside feeling so it doesn't turn into the need to over-medicate in some kind of way. Feel it in community, and it'll help you to get through it better.
So Dr. Lewis says feel it in community. Dr. Cyrus, I'll ask you. We've also seen the past few years a significant decline in church membership among all generations, but specifically among Gen Zers. I'm just curious your thoughts, because there are people who are struggling with life, who never sit in a pew, who may not believe in anything. I just wonder what piece of advice for them as they try to navigate life as people who don't believe. Like, what can we do?
Yeah, so it's actually quite similar to what Dr. Lewis was saying, which is, one, try to channel that energy in a productive way. And so one specific suggestion I have is just keep it moving. So often when it's hard to get out of bed, it seems so hard to even just, you know, get to the mailbox or run an errand, but try to get yourself physically moving. It's really important to get that energy out of your body and channel it physically. I think another thing I will say is also connecting with people who are there right in front of you, who might have something to offer and distract your mind from what you might be thinking of. Distraction is also a really incredible coping mechanism. Not too much distraction, but being able to do an activity that is pleasurable, or maybe turn off the Derek Chauvin trial, or maybe take some space from what might be causing that stress. I think one more tip might be actually maybe learning or trying to understand the source of what's going on. There's so much history to be learned about, you know, colonization and white supremacy and its impact on racial discrimination, especially in Asian American, you know, communities right now. But there's so many different ways that don't require medication or necessarily a specific spiritual belief as well, and just using your own body.
Dr. Lewis, what about people who just, they feel like they need to talk to somebody, but they don't have health insurance? They, you know, can't really afford to pay $200 an hour to a therapist. What are some resources for folks? They're not suicidal, they're not about to hurt themselves, but they just have a hard time and just want to talk it out. What are some resources for those folks?
That's great. I think there's so many online resources right now. So, I mean, you can Google online psychological support. There are meditations online. There are people to talk to in terms of psychiatrists and psychologists online. There's hotlines to call when people feel suicidal. And I think one of the benefits of COVID, though this is a horrible situation we're in, is that the whole world has gone global. So really you can connect to affinity groups for parents with trans children, for Black people suffering trauma, places to talk about Black resilience and joy. All of these things are available and free, many of them, and inexpensive in other spaces because of the digital situation we find ourselves in. And many people's work situations have just a little bit of help also to offer for medical help around mental health.
All right, just really quickly before we go, Dr. Cyrus, did you want to add to anything Dr. Lewis said?
Yeah, just to recognize when that suffering might be taking its toll. So in my world, we like to use time measurements, at least for grief. So if you're grieving the loss of someone and it's starting to go beyond, let's say, 6 months or so, then you might need to talk to someone, either a counselor or a therapist. And this would look like just increased anxiety or depression or even increases in substance use that is taking its toll most days of the week and it's impacting your functioning. And it's the same with trauma. If you find that seeing that video over and over again is making you avoid or have flashbacks of a negative experience, and that is occurring more than, let's say, 3 months after a traumatic experience, then it's time to seek some help. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be medication. It can be counseling. It can be therapy. But again, think about how much time you are suffering, and if it's impacting your life day to day, it's time to do something about it, and it's okay to ask for help. Nothing is wrong with asking for help.
Indeed, nothing is wrong with asking. Absolutely. Yeah. Nothing is wrong with asking for help. Thank you so much, ladies. Reverend Dr. Jackie Lewis and Dr. Callie Cyrus, you've been a blessing for us today.